Laughter spilled out onto the playground, and parents waved proudly at their children during drop-off. It was a place meant to symbolize safety, growth, and community. At the center of it all stood Principal Richard Harlan. To most, he was a picture of authority and respect. Polished shoes, tailored suits, and a smile that went over even the most skeptical parent. He shook hands with teachers, praised the school board, and gave heartfelt speeches about the future belonging to the children. But behind that public charm was a man unraveling. Richard had been principal for near walls, and the sound of stories being read aloud. Melissa was also expecting her first child. The glow of pregnancy seemed to amplify her presence. She was radiant, hopeful, and planning for a future that extended far beyond the school's walls. But her life intersected with Richard's in ways no one could predict it. She wasn't just a teacher at the school. She had discovered something she was never meant to know. Something Richard was desperate to keep buried. The rumors started small. Melissa had noticed discrepancies in budgets, overheard conversations that didn't add up, and quietly began keeping records of her own. Her intentions weren't malicious. She believed in accountability, in protecting the school and its students. But to Richard, she became a threat. Every smile he gave her in the hallway hid a growing bitterness. Every congratulation on her pregnancy masked the gnawing fear that she could destroy him. He told himself she was meddling. He convinced himself she needed to be stopped. And then one night, as Richard sat alone in his office, staring at the numbers he couldn't reconcile, a chilling thought entered his mind. If Melissa was gone, so were his problems. It was unthinkable at first, but once the idea rooted itself, it grew, twisted, festered, until it no longer felt like an idea, but a plan with a price tag. Richard picked up his phone and made a call. His voice was low, steady, like a man ordering a service rather than plotting a crime. He had $2,500 to make his problem disappear. The halls of Cedar Grove were still filled with laughter and innocence, but behind the locked door of the principal's office, death had just been set in motion. Richard Harlan was a master of appearances. By day, he was a proud leader of Cedar Grove Elementary, shaking hands, delivering morning announcements with confidence, and handing out gold star stickers to students who aced their spelling tests. He looked like the man every parent trusted to keep their children safe. But when the last car pulled out of the parking lot and the halls fell silent, Richard was a different man entirely. Behind his locked office door, stacks of documents told a story he couldn't admit. He had been siphoning funds from the school budget for years. Small amounts at first, then larger sums when no one noticed. A consultant fee here, a maintenance project there. On paper, it looked legitimate. In reality, he was feeding a gambling addiction that had chewed through his savings and left him drowning in debt. Melissa Turner had stumbled into the truth. As part of her extra duties, Melissa had helped organize a fundraiser for the school library. She'd taken meticulous notes and noticed that the final numbers didn't add up. At first, she thought it was a clerical error, but the deeper she looked, the more inconsistency she uncovered. And then, late one evening after a PTA meeting, she saw Richard slipping an envelope of cash into his briefcase. Her stomach twisted. Melissa wasn't naive. She knew what she had witnessed. Richard saw the look on her face that night, the recognition, the silent calculation of a woman who had just pieced together the truth. He smiled, but inside, panic clawed at him. She hadn't said anything yet. But how long would that last? The board was already watching him closely. One word from Melissa, and everything he'd worked to protect, the facade of respectability, the reputation, the last thread of authority he held, would unravel. Worse, the debt collectors who circled his life, like vultures, would finally have their feast. That's when Richard's mask slipped in private moments. At home, pacing in his dimly lit kitchen, he rehearsed conversations that never happened. She won't ruin me. She can't ruin me. His voice, once calm and authoritative, cracked with desperation. Then came the contact. Through a shady acquaintance he knew from late nights at the casino, Richard asked for a name, someone who could handle problems. At first, it felt surreal, like speaking lines of a movie. But the man on the other end of the line didn't hesitate. $2,500, he said flatly, half up front. Richard's hands trembled as he counted out the bills. The money was supposed to be for his mortgage, but by then, Richard had convinced himself there was no other way. On the outside, he still played the role of Principal Harlan, the smiling figure at the morning assembly, but inside, he was shackled to a deal with death. Melissa went on with her days, preparing her lesson plans, resting her hand on her growing belly, unaware that someone she trusted had just signed her fate with ink made of fear and greed. And Richard, for the first time, he slept soundly, not because his conscience was clear, but because he believed his problem had an expiration date. The diner was nearly empty, just the low hum of a jukebox and the clink of silverware against chipped plates. Richard sat in the back booth, his suit jacket draped over the seat, his tie loosened. He looked like any tired, middle-aged man winding down after a long day. But inside, his chest hammered like a war drum. Across from him sat a man named Victor, though Richard doubted that was his real name. Victor was tall, with a face that seemed carved from stone and eyes that never blinked for too long. He spoke little, moved less, and carried the kind of stillness that made Richard's skin crawl. "You got the cash?" Victor asked, his voice low and even. Richard nodded quickly, sliding a plain envelope across the table. His palms were slick, his fingers trembling as if the bills inside might burn through paper. Victor didn't bother counting. He tapped the envelope once, then tucked it into his jacket. And the problem? Richard hesitated. His throat tightened. Saying it out loud made it real. He thought of Melissa, her warm laugh, the way the children adored her, the quiet glow of her pregnancy. For a split second, guilt stabbed him. But then he pictured the board discovering his theft. The humiliation splashed across headlines, the creditors stripping him of everything. His fear swallowed his hesitation whole. "She's a teacher," Richard muttered. "At my school, Melissa Turner. You'll make it look like not connected." Victor studied him in silence. Then, almost casually, he pulled a small notepad from his pocket and jotted the name down. His penmanship was neat, deliberate. It felt wrong, clinical, like writing down a grocery list. "Address?" Victor asked. Richard recited it, his voice cracking, then quickly added, "Her schedule, too. She leaves by 4 most days. Sometimes later, if there's a meeting." His words tumbled over themselves, as though he was afraid he'd lose his nerve if he stopped speaking. Victor leaned back, folding the note. 3 days. Richard blinked. "Take 3 days?" "Unless you want it sooner," Victor said flatly. The reality hit him like ice water. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a countdown. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. No, 3 days is fine." Victor slid out of the booth, leaving behind only the faint smell of cigarettes and leather. He didn't look back. Richard sat there for a long time, staring at the half-empty coffee cup in front of him. The steam had already vanished, leaving the liquid cold and lifeless. He told himself it was done, that soon the threat Melissa posed would disappear, and he could breathe again. But deep down, another truth gnawed at him. Once you invite death to your table, it never truly leaves. And as the diner door closed behind Victor, Richard realized he had traded his soul for silence. Silence that would soon come at the cost of an innocent life. The sun poured through classroom windows, spilling golden light across rows of neatly stacked books and colorful posters. Melissa Turner stood by her desk, one hand resting gently on her stomach, the other holding a stack of graded essays. At 29, she felt like her life was finally coming together. Her students adored her, parents praised her, and with a baby on the way, she felt a kind of joy she had only dreamed about. The child growing inside her was a miracle, her fresh start after years of setbacks and heartbreak. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, Melissa smiled as her students rushed out, their laughter trailing down the hall. She paused to tidy her desk, humming softly to herself. She couldn't wait to tell her husband about the nursery plan she had been sketching during lunch. Yellow walls, soft curtains, a shelf full of storybooks. She had already picked out the name if it was a girl, Grace. Her co-workers often teased her for being the heart of the school, the teacher who never forgot birthdays, who stayed late to help struggling kids, who treated her students as if they were her own. Even Principal Richard had once praised her at a staff meeting, calling her the kind of teacher every parent wishes their child could have. But lately, she had sensed something different in him. The way his eyes lingered a little too long. The edge in his voice when she mentioned taking maternity leave. Melissa brushed it off at first, telling herself she was imagining things. Still, she avoided being alone with him whenever possible. "Melissa, you're glowing," her friend Carla said as they walked out to the parking lot together. "That baby's gonna have the best mom in the world." Melissa laughed, her cheeks flushing. "I just hope I'm ready. I mean, I've read all the books, but..." She glanced down at her stomach, then smiled. "I guess you can't really prepare for love like this." Carla squeezed her arm. "You'll be amazing. Don't doubt it for a second." That night at home, Melissa curled up on the couch with her husband, Daniel. He rested his hand on her belly, feeling the tiny kick to the life they had created together. "She's strong," he whispered. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "She's ours." They laughed, dreamed, and planned late into the night, completely unaware that outside their small bubble of joy, danger had already been set in motion. A man had written Melissa's name in a notepad, and a countdown had begun. Melissa drifted to sleep with Daniel's arms around her, her heart full of hope for the future. She didn't know that her greatest joy had already painted a target on her back. In 3 days, the life she cherished and the life she carried would collide with a darkness she could never have imagined. Victor leaned against the rusted hood of his car, cigarette dangling from his lips, eyes fixed on the school parking lot. The smoke curled upward, catching the pale afternoon sun before fading into the air. From a distance, he looked like any man killing time, but his gaze never left her. Melissa Turner, pregnant, radiant, completely unsuspecting. He had memorized her routine in just 2 days. She left the building around 4:15 each afternoon, sometimes with another teacher, sometimes alone. She carried the same leather satchel, her keys jingling as she unlocked her silver sedan. She always smiled at the children still playing on the swings across the street. She was consistent, predictable, easy prey. Victor scribbled notes in a small, weathered notebook. For 17, out of building. For 20, car unlocked. Husband not present. His handwriting was messy, but his focus was sharp. This wasn't just about killing. It was about control, about proving he could infiltrate someone's life so completely that their safety was nothing more than an illusion. On the 3rd day, he followed her home. He stayed 2 car lengths behind, careful not to draw attention. Melissa sang along to the radio, her head bobbing slightly, oblivious to the fact that death tailed her every turn. Her house was small but warm, with a garden of marigolds blooming by the porch. Through his binoculars, Victor watched as Melissa greeted her husband at the door, his arms instantly circling her as though she was the most precious thing in the world. Victor smirked. Perfect. That'll make it harder. Inside his head, he wasn't just studying her, he was erasing her, reducing her to a series of patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. She went to bed around 10, lights off by 10:30. The back door was unlocked 2 nights in a row. The dog barked, but it was small, harmless. Victor noted it all, his detachment chilling. To him, Melissa wasn't a mother-to-be. She wasn't a beloved teacher. She was a contract, a job, a payday. But even in his icy professionalism, cracks appeared. Watching her laugh on the porch with her husband, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, something stirred inside him, a flicker of recognition. Years ago, before prison, before debt, before Richard's money, he had known a woman who looked at him like that, with love, with trust. It had ended badly. Everything in his life ended badly. He crushed a cigarette under his boot and muttered to himself, 3 days. Then it's done. Across town, Richard O'Neill sat in his office, waiting for Victor's call, waiting to hear that the problem had been taken care of. But for now, Melissa lived in a fragile peace, unaware that the walls of her life were being mapped by a stranger's eyes, and that her every move brought her closer to danger. Melissa balanced a stack of graded essays in her arms as she fumbled with her classroom keys. The hallway was quiet. Most teachers had already left, The echo of lockers slamming and children's laughter long faded. She was alone, or so she thought. Need a hand with that? The voice came from behind her, deep, unfamiliar. She jumped, nearly dropping the papers. Turning, she saw a man, mid-40s, rugged face, sharp eyes that seemed to study every detail about her. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, no, thank you. I've got it," Melissa said, forcing a polite smile. Teachers were used to visitors, parents, contractors, sometimes strangers wandering in for information. But something about him unsettled her. Victor leaned casually against the wall, pretending to be relaxed. "You're Miss Turner, right? My niece has your class. She says you're her favorite teacher." Melissa's smile softened slightly. She lived for her students. "That's sweet. What's her name?" Victor hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but enough. "Emily." Melissa's brow furrowed. She didn't have an Emily in her class. Still, she nodded politely, not wanting to appear rude. "Well, thank you. I try to make learning fun." Victor stepped closer, closing the gap between them. He noticed the way she shifted her weight, protective hand resting on her stomach. Pregnant, vulnerable. He could do it now, one swift motion, and it would all be over. But something inside him stopped him. Maybe it was her eyes, bright but tired, filled with the kind of hope he hadn't seen in years. Or maybe it was the faint tremor in her voice, proof that she sensed the danger, even if she didn't understand it. "I'll let you get back to your work," Victor finally said, backing away. "Just want to say thanks. Teachers like you make a difference." Melissa nodded, uneasy but relieved. She watched him disappear down the hall, her instinct screaming that something was off. She told herself she was being paranoid. Pregnancy made her cautious about everything these days. Still, she locked her classroom door a little tighter that evening. Outside, Victor lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. He had gotten close enough to see the fear in her eyes, to feel her pulse quicken in the air between them. The job was simple. Richard had given him the money, the motive. All that was left was to follow through. But walking away from her that day, Victor realized something dangerous. Melissa was no longer just a name in a notebook. She was a person, a life, a heartbeat, and that made the job harder. Melissa sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the overhead light spilling across stacks of papers she hadn't yet graded. But tonight, her mind wasn't on essays or lesson plans. Her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea, though she hadn't taken a sip. Her husband, Daniel, walked in, loosening his tie after another long day at work. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head, smiling warmly. "You look a million miles away. Everything okay?" Melissa hesitated. She didn't want to worry him. Not now, not with the baby coming. But the image of that man's sharp eyes, the way he lingered too close in the hallway, wouldn't leave her. There was something strange at school today, she finally said. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Strange how?" Melissa set her mug down and rubbed her palms together. "A man approached me after class, said his niece was one of my students, but there was no Emily, at least not in my class. He knew my name, though, and she paused, shivering. He just felt off, like he wasn't supposed to be there." Daniel frowned, leaning forward. "Did you tell the principal?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I didn't want to overreact. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Pregnancy has me on edge about everything." But Daniel wasn't convinced. "Melissa, you've got instincts for a reason. If something feels wrong, it probably is. You should report it." Melissa sighed, rested her hand on her growing belly. "I will. I didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it is." He left without doing anything. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Promise me you'll be careful. Lock your doors. Don't stay late at school alone. And if you see him again, call me. Call someone." She nodded, trying to absorb his calm strength. Still, a part of her felt small, vulnerable. The school was supposed to be safe. She was supposed to be safe. And yet, her instincts told her that man wasn't gone for good. Later that night, while Daniel slept, Melissa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The man's voice echoed in her head. Teachers like you make a difference. The words were meant to sound kind, but they felt like a warning. Somewhere across town, Victor sat in his car, watching the lights of Melissa's house from a distance. He had learned her routine when she got home, when Daniel left for work, when the house fell quiet. He lit another cigarette, eyes narrowing. The money was waiting. Richard was waiting. And Melissa had no idea just how close danger had already crept. The teacher's lounge smelled faintly of coffee and copier ink. The usual hum of conversation, replaced by the clatter of mugs and the shuffle of papers. Melissa slipped inside during her lunch break, clutching a sandwich she had no appetite for. Across the room, her colleague and closest friend, Sarah, was pouring herself coffee. She looked up and smiled warmly. "Hey, Mel, you okay? You look like you haven't slept." Melissa hesitated, then sank into a chair. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped her sandwich, only to set aside untouched. "Can I tell you something and you promise not to laugh?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, concerned now. "Of course. What's going on?" Melissa lowered her voice, glancing toward the door as if the walls themselves might be listening. "A man came up to me after class yesterday. He said he was looking for his niece, but I checked the roster. No niece. And the way he looked at me, it wasn't right, Sarah. It felt like he knew me, like I was supposed to know him too." Sarah's face softened. She slid into the chair beside Melissa and put a hand over hers. "That sounds terrifying. Did you tell Richard?" Melissa shook her head. "Not yet. I don't want to make it a big deal if it's nothing." Sarah leaned closer, her tone firm. "Melissa, listen to me. You're not overreacting, especially not now. You've got more than just yourself to worry about." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Melissa's belly. "You need to talk to someone. The principal, security, anyone." Melissa's throat tightened. The thought of bringing it up to Richard made her uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. "I will. I promise. I just needed to say it out loud first. I feel like I'm losing my mind." Sarah gave her a quick squeeze. "You're not. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. And until you report it, you're carrying this alone." The bell rang, echoing through the halls, signaling the end of the lunch period. Teachers began filing out, chatting lightly about weekend plans. Melissa stood, feeling a flicker of relief for having shared her fear, but also the weight of something unresolved. As she left the lounge, she didn't notice the shadow lingering at the far end of the hallway. Victor leaned casually against a trophy case, watching her with the stillness of a predator. And just around the corner, Principal Richard Green adjusted his tie, his expression unreadable. He hadn't heard the conversation, but he noticed the way Melissa looked, anxious, unsettled. For him, it was both an opportunity and a reminder. The plan was moving forward, and Melissa's time was running short. The parking lot behind the gym was empty, the glow of a flickering street lamp casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Richard Green stood near his car, his tie loosened, his forehead damp with sweat. He glanced at his watch for the third time in 5 minutes, every tick dragging his nerves tighter. Victor finally emerged from the darkness, moving with deliberate slowness. His hands were stuffed into his jacket pockets, his eyes sharp and unhurried. Richard's jaw clenched. He hated the man's casual swagger. "You're late?" Richard snapped, his voice low but edged with panic. Victor smirked. "You're the one begging for a service. Principal, you don't get to clock me in like one of your teachers." Richard's hands balled into fists, but he forced himself to swallow his anger. "I paid you $2,500. This was supposed to be done already. What's taking so long?" Victor stepped closer, his breath visible in the cool night air. "You think this is simple? You don't just walk up to a pregnant woman in broad daylight and make her disappear. You want clean? I take my time. If you want sloppy, say the word, and I'll make the 6 o'clock news tomorrow." Richard's stomach churned. The risk of exposure terrified him more than the murder itself. He looked around the empty lot, then leaned in, his voice almost a whisper. "It has to look natural, like she was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Nothing that ties back to me. Nothing. Victor chuckled darkly. You principals always worried about appearances. His tone hardened, and he jabbed a finger against Richard's chest. But you don't get to rush me. Understand? I'll do it my way, on my time. Unless, he paused, letting the silence draw out like a blade. Unless you want to add a little more to that envelope, then maybe I'll move her up my list. Richard's throat tightened. The money had already stretched him thin. His savings account was bleeding, and every withdrawal risked drawing attention. But the thought of Melissa walking the halls every day, smiling, glowing, unknowingly holding the key to his ruin, made his skin crawl. Fine, he hissed, pulling a folded wad of cash from his pocket. Another 1,000. He pressed it into Victor's palm with shaking hands. But it has to be soon. Do you hear me? Soon, before she ruins everything. Victor tucked the money away, his grin wide and cold. Don't worry, Principal. Your problem will be gone before you know it. You'll get your tidy little world back. As Victor disappeared into the night, Richard leaned against his car, chest heaving. He told himself this was necessary, that Melissa had left him no choice. But as he stared into the shadows where Victor had vanished, a chilling realization settled over him. He wasn't in control anymore. Victor was. Melissa walked across the dimly lit hallway after school, her shoes clicking softly against the polished tiles. The classrooms were empty now, the laughter and chatter of children long gone, replaced by the hum of the building's old heating system. She carried a stack of graded papers, her mind still replaying the uneasy conversation she'd had with her colleague earlier that day. Something isn't right, she had whispered. That man keeps showing up, watching me, following me. The colleague had urged her to go to the police, but Melissa hadn't. Not yet. Maybe she didn't want to admit how real the danger felt. Maybe part of her thought it was all a misunderstanding, that the stranger's piercing eyes and lingering presence were just coincidences. But deep down, she knew better. As she locked her classroom door and turned down the corridor, she felt again the weight of eyes on her. She froze, glancing behind her. Nothing. Only shadows stretching long under the flickering fluorescent lights. Outside, parked at the edge of the school lot, a car engine idled quietly. Inside sat Victor, his face half hidden in the glow of a cigarette. He watched the side entrance, waiting. Each drag of smoke curled upward, dissolving into the stale night air. His phone buzzed. A message from Richard. It has to be soon. Victor smirked, tapping Ash out the window. Soon enough, he thought. He liked making Richard sweat. He liked knowing the principal was in too deep to back out. Melissa reached her car, fumbling with her keys. Her breath quickened, though she couldn't say why. She slipped inside and locked the doors, her eyes darting to the rear-view mirror. Still nothing, but the unease clung to her like a second skin. She started the engine and drove off, headlights slicing through the night. Behind her, Victor's car rolled forward slowly, merging into traffic at a careful distance. Back at his house, Richard paced his living room, blinds drawn, a drink untouched on the table. Every passing hour felt like a lifetime. He wanted it done, over, erased. Yet he couldn't stop the sick twist in his stomach, the gnawing thought that he had unleashed something far bigger than himself. Melissa turned onto a quiet road, leading home. The streetlights were sparse, their orange glow leaving long gaps of darkness. In one of those shadows, Victor's car followed, not close enough to be obvious, not far enough to lose her. And in that silence, between the hum of her tires and the rhythm of her heartbeat, Melissa felt it. The storm was coming. She thought the danger had passed. Melissa carried on teaching, smiling at her students, never realizing that the person who wanted her gone was sitting just a few doors away. The principal's plan hadn't vanished. It had only grown darker. Behind the closed doors of his office, Richard was desperate, enraged, and ready to give the order that would change everything. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about betrayal so deep it cuts through trust, through friendship, through life itself. And as the walls close in, Melissa has no idea that the people she relies on are the very ones plotting her final breath. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story will take twists you won't see coming. and you won't want to miss what happens next. Melissa walked through the school halls, the faint squeak of her shoes echoing on the polished floor. Students bustled past, chattering about homework and weekend plans. To them, life was ordinary. To Melissa, it was a fragile act of pretending. The strange encounter with the man who watched her from across the street, the unnerving way he seemed to linger too long, still haunted her thoughts. She had brushed it off for the sake of her students. Her job was to give them stability, not burden them with her unease. But the quiet fear was always there, lurking like a shadow she couldn't shake. At her desk, Melissa touched her growing belly and whispered to her unborn child, "We're okay. I'll keep you safe." The words comforted her for a moment, but they didn't erase the memory of the man's stare, sharp and invasive, like he already owned her fate. What she didn't know was that just a few doors down, Richard sat in his office, locked in thought. The blinds were drawn. Papers lay scattered across his desk. But his focus wasn't on lesson plans or budgets. It was on Victor. Victor had been growing impatient. He wanted his money. He wanted action. And Richard, trembling beneath his carefully polished mass of authority, was feeling the pressure. He knew he had crossed a line that could never be undone, but fear of exposure, and fear of Melissa's truth coming to light, made him double down instead of backing away. Richard picked up the phone, his hand shaking, and dialed a number that burned in his memory. "It has to be soon," he whispered when Victor answered. His voice cracked. She can't keep walking around like nothing happened." Victor's reply was cold, steady, almost casual. "Then tell me when." Outside the office, life at the school carried on as if nothing was wrong. Melissa laughed lightly with a colleague, her smile hiding the unease she carried inside. She had no idea that her principal, her superior, her supposed protector, was plotting her end. The walls of the school, once her place of purpose and safety, were now closing in with secrets too dark for anyone to imagine. And as Richard's decision hardened, Melissa's every step unknowingly led her closer to danger. The trap was tightening, and this time, escape might not come. Richard barely slept. His nights had become long stretches of pacing his office, staring at the ceiling, or clutching the phone with Victor's number on speed dial. Every second felt heavier than the last. He had made a choice, and now the shadow of that choice followed him everywhere. Victor, on the other hand, was calm. Too calm. Each time Richard called, begging for urgency, Victor's voice was steady, amused even. "You principals live in rules and routines," he drawled once. "But out here in my world, timing is everything. You'll get what you paid for, but on my clock, not yours." Richard hated the way Victor controlled him, yet he knew there was no turning back. He had handed over the money. He had spoken the words. He had given a man permission to destroy another life. Meanwhile, Melissa had begun to notice things. Little things. A man she didn't recognize parked too long outside the school gates. A stranger lingering in the grocery aisle, watching her reflection in the glass doors. She tried to brush it off as pregnancy nerves, but deep down, she felt her instincts screaming. That afternoon, she confided again in her colleague, Mrs. Anders, in the empty teacher's lounge. "I don't know, maybe it's just me being paranoid, but I feel like I'm being followed." Mrs. Anders frowned, setting down her mug. "Melissa, you're not the type to imagine things. If you feel unsafe, we should take it seriously. Tell your husband, or the police." Melissa hesitated. The word police felt heavy, dramatic. She didn't want to sound crazy. She didn't want to alarm her family. Instead, she smiled weakly and said, "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it." But she didn't act. Not yet. That same evening, Richard and Victor met in the back corner of a grimy bar off the highway. Richard's tie was loose, his palms slick with sweat. Victor leaned in, his breath heavy with whiskey, his eyes sharp and predatory. "You're hesitating," Victor said flatly. "If you want this done, you don't get to hesitate. She's out there, living her life, while you're here begging me for certainty. If you want results, I need details. Where she goes, when she's alone, when I can make it clean." Richard swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "She leaves school around 4 most days, walks to her car alone. Sometimes later if she stays for grading. It wouldn't be hard. Victor smirked. Good. Then it's just a matter of when. Richard nodded, but inside, his stomach turned. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had set in motion. Not just a plan, not just a transaction, but a countdown. And outside, somewhere in the growing dusk, Melissa walked her car unaware that two men had just sealed her fate. The clock had started ticking. Melissa's days had begun to feel off. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it, the weight of unseen eyes, the chill that crept across her skin even in the warm afternoon sun. Every time she left school, every trip to the store, every walk to her car seemed to take on a new edge. And she was right, because Victor was there. Victor had perfected the art of invisibility. He blended into parking lots, slipped behind tinted car windows, loitered at corners with the stillness of predator. From a distance, he watched her smile at students, adjust her growing belly with a gentle hand, laugh nervously with colleagues. To Victor, she was no longer a woman. She was a target, an assignment, a paycheck waiting to be collected. One late afternoon, Melissa left the school with a stack of papers clutched to her chest. The hallway was quiet. The day had bled into evening. As she stepped into the parking lot, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A man leaning against a car at the far end. She froze, heart thudding. But when she blinked, he was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Melissa forced herself into her car, locking the doors as soon as she shut them. She sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady her breathing. It's nothing. It's just nerves, she told herself. But her gut whispered otherwise. That night, Victor followed her home for the first time. He kept his distance, his headlights dimmed, a hunter savoring the thrill of the chase. He parked half a block away, watching as Melissa carried groceries inside, pausing to smile at her husband waiting at the door. Through his windshield, Victor muttered, "You have no idea." Inside, Melissa laughed faintly, pushing away the unease for the comfort of her home. But outside, Victor sat in the dark, his cigarette tip glowing like a tiny ember of the danger creeping closer. The next morning at school, Mrs. Anders noticed Melissa's pale face and restless eyes. "Melissa, are you okay? You look exhausted." Melissa hesitated, then whispered, "I think someone's following me, but when I look, they're gone. I don't know if I'm imagining it." Mrs. Anders gripped her hand. "You're not imagining it. Something's wrong. Please don't ignore it." Melissa nodded, but fear locked her words away. She didn't know how to explain the shadow that never spoke, never touched, but never left her side. And all the while, Victor grew bolder. He was done watching from afar. Soon, he would close the distance. The shadow was ready to step into the light. The school day had ended, and the late autumn air carried a cool bite. Melissa walked briskly toward her car, clutching her tote bag, her eyes darting across the lot the way they always did now. She told herself she was being paranoid, but her pulse didn't believe it. This time, though, someone was there, a tall man in a dark jacket, leaned casually against the hood of the car parked beside hers. He looked up as she approached, smiling in a way that was meant to be disarming, but instead made her stomach twist. "Evening," he said, his voice deep, smooth. "Cold out tonight, isn't it?" Melissa froze mid-step. He didn't look like a parent, not like a teacher. Something about him was wrong. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice clipped. He chuckled softly, shrugging. No, just waiting on someone. I think my niece goes here. Figured I'd say hello. You're a teacher, right?" Melissa gripped her keys tighter. "Yes, I am, but visiting hours are over. You should probably check in with the office if you're waiting for a student." For a moment, his eyes sharpened, cold, assessing, but then the smile returned, thin and calculated. "Of course. Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You just look kind, like the kind of teacher kids don't forget." Melissa's heart hammered. She muttered a polite, "Thank you," slipped into her car, and locked the doors immediately. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled with the ignition. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him step away, his hands in his pockets, strolling off as though he had all the time in the world. But the encounter clung to her. He hadn't asked for directions. He hadn't named his niece. He hadn't looked lost. He had looked interested. Too interested. Melissa drove off quickly, her eyes glued to the rear-view mirror. For a stretch of road, she was sure the same black sedan lingered behind her, headlights low, steady, never passing. Her breath caught, and then, just like before, it was gone. That night, she told herself it was nothing, just another stranger, just nerves. But deep down, she knew better. This wasn't random. He was watching. He wanted her to know he existed. Across town, Victor sat in his sedan, smirking. He could still feel her fear vibrating in the air between them. The first contact had been made, and the game had begun. Next time, he muttered, she won't walk away so easily. Melissa sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of the TV in the living room, where her husband, David, sat half watching the news. She had tried to shake off the encounter in the school parking lot, telling herself it was just a stranger being awkward, but the look in that man's eyes kept replaying in her head. The way his smile hadn't quite reached them, the way he had studied her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. Finally, she couldn't keep it in anymore. She walked into the living room, her voice unsteady. "David, can we talk?" He muted the TV and looked up, concern flickering across his face. "Of course. What's wrong?" Melissa sat down beside him, clutching her hands together, so tightly her knuckles turned white. "There was someone in the parking lot after school today." David's brow furrowed. "A parent?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "At least, I don't think so." He said he was waiting for his niece, but he didn't know her name, and he wasn't carrying anything. He just stood there, watching me. David leaned forward, his protective instinct kicking in. "Did he touch you? Threaten you?" "No, but he knew I was a teacher. He said I looked kind, like he'd been watching me." Her voice cracked. "I can't explain it, David, but it felt wrong, like he wasn't there by accident." Her husband's jaw tightened. "Melissa, you should have told me right away. You need to report this. If he's hanging around the school, that's dangerous, not just for you, but for the kids." Melissa bit her lip, tears stinging her eyes. "I didn't want to overreact. I already feel like people think I'm being paranoid. First, the car I thought was following me. Now this, what if it's all just in my head?" David reached out, gripping her hand firmly. "Hey, don't do that to yourself. Your instincts are telling you something's off, and I trust them. Promise me you'll talk to the school security tomorrow. And maybe it's time we start looking at getting some cameras here home too." Melissa nodded, though her stomach churned with unease. Part of her wanted to believe David's calm, rational tone, that she was safe as long as he was near. But another part of her couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's words had been more than idle small talk. Upstairs, as she tried to sleep, she replayed the moment again and again. The smile, the eyes, the casual menace behind the polite words. And a single thought echoed through her mind like a drumbeat. He'll be back. Victor sat alone in his truck, headlights off, the faint glow of a cigarette the only light in the darkness. He had followed Melissa home that evening, watched her disappear safely into the warmth of her house, the porch light snapping on like a shield. He hated that light. It made him feel exposed. His phone buzzed. Richard. He let it ring twice before answering, his tone casual, though his pulse jumped. "Yeah." On the other end, Richard's voice was tight, almost trembling with barely contained frustration. "What are you doing, Victor? It's been weeks. Weeks. You told me this would be quick." Victor blew out smoke, deliberately slow. "These things take time. You don't just walk up and make it happen. She's got people around her, a husband, colleagues, neighbors. One wrong move and I'm done." "You're paid to take risks," Richard snapped, his voice rising. "I gave you $2,500, my whole savings. I want results. Do you understand? She needs to be gone. Now." Victor smirked in the darkness, even as he felt the pressure tightening around him. Richard had no idea what taking someone out really meant, how patience was just as much a weapon as a knife he carried in his pocket. "I understand," Victor said coolly, "but you don't rush this kind of thing. You rush, you get sloppy, and sloppy means prison. You want her gone, you let me work my way in." Richard was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice cracked, betraying the fear under his bravado. "She's ruining everything. My job, my reputation. If she keeps this up, my whole life falls apart. Do you get that? I can't wait forever. Victor, do it soon, or I'll find someone else who will." Victor's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being threatened, not by Richard, not by anyone. He let the silence hang for a beat, making Richard sweat on the other end. Then he said, his voice low and dangerous, "You don't scare me, but if you want this done right, you'll shut your mouth and let me do it my way. The more you push, the more noise you make. You want noise, Richard? Noise gets us both caught." Richard swallowed audibly. "Fine, but this week, Victor. I mean it, this week." The call ended. Victor stared at the phone for a long moment, then flicked the cigarette out into the night. He could feel Richard's panic creeping into his own veins, making his job more urgent, more volatile. As he sat there, a new thought formed, sharp as glass. Maybe it's time to stop watching. Maybe it's time to test how much she fears me. And somewhere inside, he relished the idea. Victor woke before dawn, the world still and small. He liked mornings. Nobody expected a predator to be awake at sunrise. He brewed coffee in the chipped thermos he kept in his truck and watched the neighborhood wake. Mail trucks, joggers, a father corralling kids to a minivan. To them, he was invisible. Perfect. He had stalked her from afar for weeks, learned the cadence of her life like a song he could hum in his sleep. Every turn, every porch light, every casual wave from a neighbor was a data point, but observation had been a prelude. Now it was time for contact without contact, to be seen but tolerated, to be close and still a shadow. His first move was small and deliberate. He bought a cheap folding lawn chair and set it beneath the sycamore near the school's front path. From there, he could watch foot traffic without appearing odd. An old man reading a paper, a neighborhood watcher. Twice he coached his face into mild expressions, puzzled, kindly, forgetful. On the third day, Melissa noticed him in profile as she walked the kids out to the buses. She frowned, only briefly. To her, an added presence in the mornings was a harmless curiosity. To Victor, it was a probe with promising results. Next, he escalated in ways that would seem ordinary to anyone else. He volunteered at the Saturday book drive, an event Melissa helped run. He signed his name on a clipboard as Victor Lane. He showed up early, carried boxes, joked with parents. He didn't hover near her. He simply existed in the same space where her back was often turned. When she passed him a stack of coloring books, his fingers brushed the edge of her hand. It was accidental in the world's eyes. It registered in hers as a prickle of unease. Inside him, the shift felt electric. Up close, he cataloged her habits. The slight hitch when she laughed at a child's joke, the way she tucked hair behind her ear when thinking, the habit of rubbing her belly while reading aloud. He drank these small details like a man starving. That same week, he began manipulating routine. He learned which day the cafeteria emptied last, which hall light flickered when no one was there, which janitor worked the late shift. He timed his crossings so their paths overlapped when chances of witnesses were smallest. He sent a bouquet to the wrong classroom. Simple logistics error, he'd say later. Ensuring he'd appear at the door to apologize. He made himself familiar. Melissa's unease grew teeth. She snapped at a student at recess and immediately felt guilty, the pressure of fear sharpening into irritability. At home, she woke at 3 a.m. with a panic she couldn't name. David noticed the small changes, her jumpiness. The phone clutched like a lifeline on the nightstand. He called the school and left a message. Check security footage, please. For Melissa. But the cameras, the protocols, the logic, none of it stopped Victor. He didn't need to break locks when he could bend people with presence. He smiled for the PDA, exchanged pleasantries with the secretary, and volunteered to help hang autumn banners in the auditorium, the very spot where Melissa would rehearse a new reading for her students that week. On the day he set the ladder, he positioned it under the spotlight of the stage. He stayed where the light hit, making himself visible as she walked by. Melissa paused, met his eyes, and for the first time since the parking lot, looked truly afraid. His smile was still the same thin, polite one, but his internal voice was a whisper. Soon, outside, a siren passed, a distant, ordinary sound that cut through the afternoon like a metronome. Time kept moving. People moved through their lives, unaware their paths had been altered. Victor moved closer, measured and inexorable, the distance between intent and action shrinking with every voluntary smile. Melissa was unraveling. At school, she kept her composure for children, her smile steady, her voice warm, but underneath, fear gnawed like a steady drumbeat. Every corner of the building felt haunted by him. The man who had first been a stranger outside now seemed woven into the fabric of her daily life. The staff lounge was no longer a refuge. She'd enter, carrying her tea, only to find Victor already there, chatting politely with custodian or flipping to the bulletin board notices. When their eyes met, he'd nod casually, as though his presence was nothing unusual. To everyone else, he was just a helpful volunteer. To Melissa, he was a shadow that wouldn't leave. At night, the weight followed her home. David noticed her trembling hands as she graded papers at the kitchen table. He pressed her gently. "Melissa, this is getting worse. You can't just ignore it." But what could she say? That she felt hunted but had no proof? That the man smiling at her in broad daylight was plotting something darker in the silence? Sleep betrayed her. She woke often, heart pounding, after dreams where she was being chased through the empty halls of the school. Sometimes she'd hear a knock, faint and deliberate, at the window, only to find nothing there but her own reflection. David tried to reassure her, but even his arms couldn't smother the rising sense of inevitability. Meanwhile, Richard was losing patience. In his office, he met Victor again under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The stacks of paperwork around him couldn't hide the tension that filled the air. "What's taking so long?" Richard hissed, voice sharp, his control fraying. Victor leaned back, calm in a way that infuriated Richard. "These things take time. You don't rush precision." Richard slammed a fist onto the desk, paper scattering. "Time isn't something I have. She's still here, every day, smiling like nothing's wrong. If you don't finish this soon, you'll regret it. Do you understand?" For a moment, silence stretched, taut as wire. Then Victor leaned forward, his voice low, almost amused. "You think I answer to you, Richard? I don't. I'll act when I'm ready. But don't worry." He let the pause linger, his eyes glinting in the half-light. "She won't see it coming." Richard's anger simmered, but fear flickered underneath it. He had chosen Victor for his precision, his control, but now he realized he had unleashed something even he couldn't rein in. Back at home, Melissa clutched her husband's hand as they double-checked the locks. The air thick with an unspoken truth neither wanted a voice. The danger wasn't gone. It was circling closer, and as Victor tightened his net around her, appearing where she least expected, moving closer each day, Melissa felt the walls of her life narrowing, suffocating. Somewhere deep down, she knew the moment of confrontation was no longer a possibility. It was a promise. The week dragged forward like a nightmare Melissa couldn't wake from. By now, Victor's presence was more than coincidence. He wasn't just lurking. He was orchestrating. Each day, his appearances crept closer, more deliberate, like a predator circling prey. One morning, Melissa arrived at school early, hoping to find peace and stillness before her students arrived. But as she unlocked her classroom, she felt it, that prickle on the back of her neck. She turned, and there he was, standing at the far end of the hall, his figure framed in the dim glow of the overhead lights. He didn't move. He just watched. Melissa's hand froze on the doorknob, her breath caught in her throat. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her attempted strength. Victor smiled faintly, tilting his head. "Just making sure everything's safe around here. You never know what can happen when people let their guard down." The words weren't a threat, not directly, but the way he said them made Melissa's blood run cold. That night, she broke down at home. Her husband, David, found her curled on the couch, tears soaking into the cushions. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "He's everywhere, David. I feel like I'm losing my mind." David pulled her close, his jaw tight. "You're not losing your mind. This isn't in your head. He's crossing lines, and I won't let him hurt you." He reached for his phone. "We're going to police." But Melissa hesitated. The fear wasn't just of Victor. It was of being dismissed, of people thinking she was paranoid. What if the police saw him as nothing more than a school volunteer or a harmless stranger? What if her complaint only made things worse? Across town, Richard was unraveling. Each day Melissa remained alive was another day his plan teetered on the edge of collapse. He stormed into the hidden corner of the diner where he and Victor often met, his face flushed with fury. "You're dragging this out too long," Richard spat, slamming an envelope of cash onto the table. "Do it now. Tonight. No more games." Victor didn't flinch. He lifted his coffee cup, sipping slowly before replying. "You don't get to dictate the when. That's not how this works." "Don't forget who's paying you," Richard snapped. Victor's expression hardened, his calm turning to ice. "And don't forget who's doing your dirty work. If I go down, you go down with me. Do you understand?" For the first time, Richard faltered. The balance of power had shifted. He had started this plan believing he was in control, but now, sitting across from Victor, he realized he had unleashed something far darker than his own ambition. That night, Melissa lay awake, the shadows of the room stretching long and menacing. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, felt like a warning. She clutched her stomach, her unborn child stirring within, and whispered through tears, "Please, let me keep you safe." But outside, somewhere in the darkness, Victor was planning. His patience had reached its end. The breaking point was here. The night air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that presses against the chest. Melissa had stayed late at school, grading papers under the hum of fluorescent lights. The building was nearly empty, its corridors hollow, echoing with each step she took. She told herself she wasn't afraid. She told herself she had imagined Victor's stare, his footsteps, his voice whispering threats between the lines of ordinary words. But deep down, her body knew the truth. Her hands shook as she gathered her things, her heart thudding with urgency she couldn't suppress. As she pushed open the side door, the chill of spring air struck her face. And then she froze. Victor was waiting, leaning casually against the brick wall. He looked as though he had been there forever, watching. His shadow stretched long under the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. "Working late again," he said softly, stepping forward. His tone was calm, almost friendly, but Melissa could hear the sharpness beneath it. Her breath caught. "Leave me alone, Victor," she managed, her voice trembling. But Victor only smiled. "I can't do that. Not yet." He stepped closer, and Melissa's grip tightened on her bag. Her instinct screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She thought of her students. She thought of David. She thought of the child she carried. The child who hadn't even been given a chance. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the far end of the lot. David. He had come to walk her home. Victor's expression shifted, the calm mask cracking. He glanced at David, then back at Melissa, and for the first time, she saw hesitation flicker in his eyes. "Another time," he muttered, melting back into the shadows before David could reach him. Melissa collapsed into her husband's arms, her sobs breaking the night. David held her tightly, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Across town, Richard sat alone in his office, the clock ticking louder with every passing second. His hands trembled as he poured himself a drink, realizing the truth. He had lost control of everything. Victor wasn't just his weapon anymore. He was his reckoning. Melissa didn't know it yet, but the storm was far from over. Victor had retreated, but only to plan. Richard had grown desperate, but desperation makes men reckless. The line between safety and tragedy had never been thinner, and as Melissa whispered prayer over her unborn child, one thought echoed louder than the rest. The danger isn't gone. It's only waiting. Melissa survived this night, but just barely. The man whose shadows her steps isn't finished, and the one who ordered her death is growing more desperate with every passing day. The question now is not if the attack will come, but when Richard's lies are unraveling. Victor is circling closer, and Melissa's world is on the edge of collapse. What happens next will shock you. If you've been gripped by this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss part 3. The climax of Melissa's fight for survival and the chilling truth about the man who betrayed her. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones we trust the most.